Gateway to Hell. The estate at Falkenhagen, a modest settlement on the eastern outskirts of Berlin, had been built with pride and trumpeted across the Reich as a showpiece of the new age. Rows of uniform concrete flats, freshly painted and smelling faintly of mortar, rose neatly around a wide communal courtyard where lawns, washing lines and play areas created an image of domestic harmony. The government called them people's homes, Volkswohnungen, dwellings for the model German family. To the fathers who had labored through the Depression, they were a great step forward. To the mothers, they were clean, modern, respectable. To the children, they were simply a world to run about in, full of corners for hide and seek, and stairwells for echoing mischief. What no one living there knew was that the estate had been built on top of something very old and something very new. Long before the first family moved in, the foundations had been dug deeper than needed. Tunnels had been carved in secret, laboratories sealed behind reinforced steel, and strange diagrams painted onto the stone in chalks that glowed faintly even in darkness. Engineers were ordered never to speak of it. Workers, who asked too many questions, were reassigned overnight, vanishing from the project entirely. There were rumors, of course, that the SS had an interest in occult sciences, that certain academics had been pulled from universities to study ancient Germanic energies. But on the surface, Falkenhagen looked like any other new build. Clean, bright, ordinary. The first disturbance came on a still autumn morning in late 1938. The sun rose pale and watery, glinting off the metal railings and the small swings in the courtyard. Mothers gathered to share gossip as they hung washing from their balconies. A few fathers who worked irregular shifts sat on benches, smoking, enjoying moments of quiet before the day began. Children chalked hopscotch squares on the paving stones. It was the kind of peaceful scene officials liked, photographed for propaganda pamphlets. Then, the ground trembled. It was a subtle thing at first, a shiver running through the paving slabs, like a heavy lorry passing nearby. But no lorry came. Instead, a low groaning sound rolled up from beneath their feet. Some glassware rattled in kitchens. A few windows vibrated slightly. "New buildings settle," said old Herr Leopold, the caretaker, pretending calm as he tamped tobacco into his pipe. "It is nothing." But his voice wasn't steady, and he kept glancing at the earth, as if fearing it might move again. At 10 minutes past 10, the ground bulged. People stumbled back. Chalk drawings cracked down the middle. Several children screamed. A seam tore through the center of the courtyard, and the earth sank downward as though pulled by unseen hands. By 10:15, a hole had opened. Not a clean circular sinkhole, but a jagged tear, like a gash through the soil. It was about 7 meters across and sloped inward, as if gravity had suddenly grown confused. A rush of cold air, shockingly cold, spilled out from the depths. It made the washing lines flutter and the hairs along people's arms stand upright. More unsettling still was the sound drifting up from it. A quiet whisper, not quite words, but not natural either, like dozens of voices mumbling beneath a closed door. The police were telephoned. Engineers were summoned. The courtyard was roped off quickly, but not quickly enough to discourage children. By late afternoon, several curious youngsters had crept as close as the adults would allow. The hole seemed to pull their attention like a magnet. That evening, long after, the officials left with vague reassurances and promises to return in the morning. 4 children gathered beside the sagging rope barrier. 11-year-old Lucas, his 9-year-old sister Annalisa, their friend Otto, and little Greta, who tagged along despite being only 8 and prone to nightmares. They stood in silence, staring into the hole. A faint mist drifted up from below, although the air remained strangely dry. "I bet it's a tunnel," Otto whispered. "My uncle says the Nazis build tunnels everywhere." Lucas nodded. Maybe a bunker. Annalisa swallowed nervously. She would have agreed to anything that made sense, anything that wasn't frightening. It's just part of the ground, falling in, she said. That's all. Greta didn't move. Her big round eyes shone with reflected darkness. There are people talking down there, she said quietly. The others stiffened. What people? Lucas asked. Greta's gaze didn't leave the abyss. They said my name. A gust of icy wind curled upward. The whispering grew louder for a moment, like a sigh or the rustle of shifting pages. Something word-like drifted past their ears. So faint, it could have been imagined. Annalisa stepped back, almost tripping. Come away, Greta. You're scaring us. But Greta leaned forward, dangerously close to the edge. They want us to come down, she murmured, and took another tiny step. Lucas lunged and grabbed her coat, dragging her back so sharply she squealed. Pebbles skittered into the hole, rattling against unseen depths. Don't do that, he shouted. Are you mad? Greta blinked rapidly, as if waking from a trance. They were calling me, she whispered. None of the children spoke on the walk home. Each of them had heard something, faint, impossible, yet unmistakable, and none dared admit it aloud. What happened first was small. Herr Köhler, a stonemason known to take late-night walks, didn't return home. His wife assumed he'd stopped in a tavern, but morning came. His bed remained cold. By midday, the police had been notified. Before evening, 2 more tenants were missing. A widow fond of feeding the courtyard cats, and a teenage boy who often stayed out longer than he should. 3 disappearances in one day on an estate barely a year old. The coincidence was too great for the residents, not great enough for the police. They looked into the hole again, shining torches down. The beams illuminated nothing but drifting dust, and a void that swallowed light after a few meters. They declared it unrelated. Impossible, the chief inspector said firmly. The estate was built on solid ground. There are no caves or tunnels beneath it. This was untrue, but not a lie. He simply didn't know. That night, the whispering grew louder. Families bolted doors, drew curtains, and left lights burning. Children cried, complaining of voices under the floorboards. Greta's nightmares worsened. She woke screaming at irregular hours, shaking violently, eyes rolling as though she were trying to look inward. Her parents summoned a doctor, who muttered about stress, imagination, overexcitement. But her father saw something else, something he remembered from old folk tales, told in hushed tones, by elders who believed the world held more than men admitted. 3 fathers, driven beyond patience and fear, met in secret 2 nights later. They gathered in a dimly lit living room. Herr Baumann, stocky and practical. Herr Fischer, quiet and intelligent. And Herr Dietrich, father of Lucas and Annalisa. Their wives hovered in the kitchen, listening, anxious. I've heard noises for weeks, Fischer confessed. Long before the ground opened. Machinery and other sounds, like chanting. The party builds many things, Baumann replied, uncomfortable. Research sites, storage rooms, training facilities. Not beneath new housing, Dietrich interrupted. They built something down there. Something they didn't want us to know about. He leaned forward, eyes burning with determination. My grandfather told stories from the last war, about the military flirting with occult studies, about rituals to contact old spirits for power. The Nazis have revived all sorts of old superstitions under the banner of science. You're talking myths, not reality, Baumann said stubbornly. We can't jump to fantasies. Then, explain the whole, Dietrich snapped. Explain how people vanish. Explain what our children hear. Silence stretched. The wives listened with rising dread. Finally, Fischer lowered his voice, almost whispering. I know where the entrance to the tunnels is. Both men stared. What tunnels? Bauman demanded. The ones they built before the estate, Fisher said simply. I saw engineers going down when construction began. They sealed it up afterwards, but the entrance is still there, behind a false wall in the cellar of Building A. The decision was made without ceremony. They would go down that night. They would see what lay beneath, and if it was dangerous, they would put a stop to it. At midnight, armed only with lanterns, rope, crowbars, and a bundle of dynamite Bauman had smuggled from the quarry where he worked, the three men met again. They slipped silently through the stairwell into the cellar, pried away the false wall panel, and stared into the darkness beyond. Cold, stale air poured out. Not the smell of damp, but something older, metallic, faintly smoky, like the breath of a furnace, extinguished centuries ago. They descended. The tunnels were narrow at first, lined with bare concrete and stamped with construction code numbers. Pipes ran overhead. The deeper they went, the colder it became. They passed sealed doors with heavy bolts, small rooms containing workstations coated in dust, abandoned crates with illegible labels. What was this? Bauman muttered. Research, Fisher replied grimly. The kind no one is meant to hear about. The whispering grew steadily louder. At first it was indistinguishable, a murmur of static. Then shapes emerged in the sound. Faint words, sobbing, chanting. Then a rising chorus of overlapping voices, unlike anything human. Sometimes the sound seemed to drift behind them, sometimes ahead, sometimes directly in their skulls. They descended deeper still, until the tunnel opened into a cavernous subterranean hall, directly beneath the courtyard. It was enormous, its walls reinforced with steel beams, its floor cracked from some ancient stress. At its center gaped a chasm, not a natural fissure, and not caused by any collapse. Its edges glowed faintly red, as though lit from below by dying coals. They pulsed subtly, contracting and expanding like the lips of a giant wound struggling to close. Something moved inside. The three men froze as a shape emerged from the glow, climbing, slowly and deliberately, up the jagged sides of the pit. It was taller than a man, its wings leathery and veined, its body a grotesque blend of stone-like hide and grotesque muscle. Its head resembled a gargoyle, horned, snarling, with hollow sockets where eyes should be. Yet somehow it saw them. It cocked its head, listening, tasting their fear. Then it spoke, though its mouth did not move. The words were inside their minds, carried on a wave of cold. Let us through. The ground trembled. We have waited long. Fisher screamed first. The creature lunged across the cavern, wings scraping against metal beams with ear-splitting screeches. Back, Bauman shouted, fumbling for the dynamite. They ran, stumbling up the tunnel. The creature's roar shook dust from the ceiling in choking clouds. Metal fixtures rattled loose and clattered behind them. Bauman turned, lit a fuse with trembling hands, and hurled the bundle towards the glowing fissure. Run, he screamed. They did. They ran blindly, boots slipping on concrete, lungs tearing with each breath. The explosion tore through the tunnels like thunder. A hot, violent shockwave hurled them forward. The ceiling cracked. Pipes burst. Lights shattered. But they had not sealed the gateway. They had torn it wider. Above ground, those who were still awake heard a low, monstrous rumble roll beneath their flats. Windows quivered. The courtyard heaved as though the world itself were trying to turn inside out. Then the hole split open. The ground burst apart. Soil and rubble collapsed into a widening crater. A laundry line vanished. The sandpit vanished. Part of Building C's outer staircase crumbled and dropped into the abyss. And from below, creatures climbed. One at first, then another, and another. Winged horrors, armored beasts that scuttled on claws as long as knives. Some flew, swooping low enough that their shadows flickered across the screaming residents. Some crawled along the walls like spiders, defying gravity. Their faces were twisted, hot with violent hunger. Their shrieks cracked glass. The night became a storm of blood. Herr Fischer never made it out of the tunnels. His scream echoed up the staircase, cut short with sickening abruptness. His wife was killed, moments later, when a creature burst through her front window. Families poured into the courtyard in chaotic torrents, dragging children, carrying elderly parents, clutching bags of valuables. The creatures hunted them, mercilessly. Otto's father was seized by a winged beast, carried 10 meters into the air and torn in two. Frau Leitner, holding her baby, was cornered against a wall by something with horns like a ram and jaws like a wolf. Her screams faded quickly. Little Greta stood paralyzed, eyes glassy, whispering, "They're here," as something huge crouched behind her. It plucked her off the ground as delicately as a doll. Lucas and Annalisa ran until their lungs burned, their father dragging them both toward the edge of the estate. But another winged monster swooped low, knocked him aside, and crushed him beneath its talons. By 3 in the morning, the estate was drowning in slaughter. Blood soaked the gravel. Bodies lay crumpled in doorways and scattered across the grass. Fires broke out where crashed creatures smashed through walls, igniting lamps and cooking stoves. Someone managed to telephone for help before being killed, and panic spread through the regional command. Reports were contradictory, hysterical, impossible. Monsters, flying creatures, mass hallucination. But one thing was clear. Something catastrophic was happening at Falkenhagen, and no officer wanted it spreading. Orders went up the chain within minutes. At dawn, with the estate still choked with shrieking beasts and broken homes, the sky rumbled with the engines of approaching aircraft. Several squadrons of Luftwaffe bombers swept low over the horizon, their silhouettes dark against the reddening sky. They flew in formation, silent, but for the drone of engines. Residents of neighboring towns, miles away, looked up in bewilderment. The bombers opened their bays, and without warning, a rain of explosives fell upon Falkenhagen. The first blasts obliterated the courtyard, erasing the whole in a storm of dirt and fire. Buildings collapsed instantly, pancaking into heaps of concrete and splintered beams. Windows shattered for kilometers around. Creatures were torn apart, hurled into walls, or vaporized. More bombs followed, then more. The estate was engulfed in explosions that burned so hot, the ground fused into black glass in places. When the smoke cleared hours later, nothing remained. No bodies, no survivors, no hole. Only a cratered wasteland, steaming under the morning sun, and silence. Not even the whispering remained. Just smoke, darkness, and death. The end.